Hey there, I'm Gabby and I'm a wet and wet oil painter. And today I'm going to paint a picture and I'm just going to go over what I'm going to do just to kind of give you guys an idea of this special project. So this right here is a saw blade. You can see the back is rusty. I have the front primed and it is primed with a spray paint that is like a complete rust blocker converter. And I did not file these down, and I do saw blades all the time, but I don't file them down if they have like sort of like burned on nylon-y plastic stuff. I will scrape that off, but because I primed these with the right stuff, I don't have to sand them down. And some of the saw blades that I get will be like the humongous saw blades, like 30-40 inch saw blades, just massive, and some of those will be really pitted, and I just leave them completely pitted and I prime over the top of them, and then I paint them and I sort of use the texture on them to my advantage. And it's that simple. So if you're going to do this, you want to look for a spray paint that is like a rust converter or a complete rust blocker, because they do rust. It's just the nature of the material. And then sometimes I will take these after I've done that and I will spray them with a layer of like acrylic spray paint or a very matted white spray paint, because I don't want them to be glossy when I paint on them. So once I get the surface prepped, then I paint on them. Now this picture I'm going to grab some white acrylic paint and I'm going to prime it. White or black, I haven't decided yet. Anyways, I will do a coat of acrylic primer over the top of it. Now if I do the spray paint with it, I don't have to do that. That saves a lot of time. But I'm going to do a layer of acrylic over this, and then after that I'm going to paint it wet and wet, just like it was a canvas. So let me get it primed and then I'll get back to you guys. Okay, so there it is. I decided I'm going to do it black. I'm going to do a black scene. I have a lot of saw blades that I've done that are sort of light colored, so I thought I'd have some fun and do one dark color. Now, one thing I wanted to mention as I went through this process, it made me think of something. The surface of the metal is so soft. I think that's the best word I can use for it. And so you can really see brush strokes on these. So whatever direction you decide is going to be sort of the upward direction of it, just make sure that you paint your brush strokes with your acrylic sort of horizontally to cover up those brush strokes, because even after the oil goes on here, I'm still going to see them. Now this is almost completely dry. I use a really fast drying acrylic when I do this. And so I'm going to set it up on my easel and then I'm going to paint it. Okay, so it's all nice and dry, and I have some Prussian blue, and I'm going to do the whole surface. Now, if you do this, you could add a little bit of paint thinner to your color. You could do liquid clear, but again, this is such a smooth surface that it is really easy to over liquefy a saw blade. So by doing this with like just a straight up oil paint, it's probably going to work out better than trying to do like a liquid clear first. And so you could put a little bit of linseed oil or a tiny bit of paint thinner. One other thing about painting on metal and on saw blades is that they tend to, even though they tend to like get really slicked up, they also tend to dry out really fast. So if you are wet painting, you definitely want to paint fast. So I would not suggest painting one of these and taking breaks from it unless you're doing like what I think of as traditional oil painting or sort of dry oil painting, where you do, little bits here and here, because it will dry out. And I'm just dipping my brush in a bit of Gamsol as I'm going through this just to loosen it up a little bit, because this Prussian blue that I'm using, I actually put on my palette yesterday when I was working on a different project. I emptied out a tube yesterday, and so whenever I empty out the bottom of a tube, I just put the extra on my palette and then try to use it up. That was part of the reason that I wanted to do a dark picture today. I did a little lesson talking about paint tubes, and it's got actually some probably really good information in it. And I talk about emptying out paint tubes when you get to the bottom. Now, if you just squeeze as much paint out of a paint tube as you can, they say you leave up to 30% of the contents of the tube in the paint, or in the tube. You leave 30% of the contents of the paint inside of the tube. And that's a really big waste of paint, especially if you buy expensive paint. So I cut mine open, and if you want to know more about that, just check out that video I did. It might be helpful. All right, so now I have it primed. Smaller surface means smaller brushes. That's sort of a rule of thumb. So if you're going to paint a really huge picture, big, huge brushes make more sense. Again, smaller. I'm going to grab some white, and this is a little bit softer white. This is a Blick artist quality oil paint, which I find their artist quality to be not much better than a student quality, but not that it really matters. Okay, let's grab a brush. And I think I'm going to take just a little tiny flat brush here. I'm going to put some white in it. And I'm going to do some clouds. If you have a hard time with clouds, I really suggest that you first choose to not take clouds so seriously and so literally. It is so easy to be like, oh, a cloud needs to look like this, and then you do it, and then it ends up looking really fake and cheesy. Clouds sort of kind of do their own thing, and so just sort of let them do that in your picture. I'm going to use a blender brush. Now, usually I would use one of my bigger goat blender brushes, but because this is such a small area that I'm working on, I'm going to use a tiny little goat hair brush that I have. It looks like that. And then just blend. And again, keep in mind, these saw blades, they get very wet and yet dry out really fast, kind of simultaneously. So if you over wet it, you're going to have a big swamp on your canvas, aka saw blade. And if you don't do it fast enough, it'll dry out. It's almost like the challenge of painting with acrylic. Oh, goodness sakes. Flinging paint around. Okay, so now I have my sky. I'm going to tip it a little bit. I don't want it to look too crooked for you guys as I go through this process. It might be a bit confusing. Now to decide what I'm going to paint. I think I'll paint some mountains. Saw blades and forests and mountains and all that kind of stuff, they all tend to go together, so I think that'll be a good thing to do. I'm going to take some of my white, take some black. Now, the time it takes usually to paint one of these saw blades is a lot smaller because it's a much smaller space. The only trick is you have to sort of figure out how to fill out the space smaller. I'm going to move this actually for a second, guys, but I'm going to try to hold it. So a lot of times I'll end up actually holding these while I paint them. Especially with the way my easel is. I probably could put it out on the pegs of my easel, so we'll see. I'll play with it in a second here. See if I can tighten up this peg well enough to do this. Okay, that actually worked pretty good. Let me just adjust this really quick. There, awesome. Sometimes I do long saws, sometimes I do like two-man crosscut saws as well. And if you do that stuff, the tricky thing is because they're narrow but really, really long, you have to sort of figure out how to fit a picture into those. So if you ever do those, I would suggest that you sort of, if you don't map it out on paper, at least map it out in your head what you're going to be doing. Now these little saw blades, I sell them for really cheap. I sell them for like 20 bucks a saw blade. And I sell a lot of them. But the bigger ones I sell for a lot more money because the saw blades cost more and they take more work. Now, because it takes less time, you'd think, yeah, I could probably sell this for cheaper because that's what I sell my regular 16x20s for. But the prep work beforehand for the saw blades is sort of what ends up taking more time. And so that's sort of the back half of the cost of doing these saw blades. There we go. Now, when I did that white, it pulled some of the blue off the mountain, which is perfect. I'm just going to sort of mix it up on my palette then. Maybe I'll throw a tiny bit more blue in it. Maybe a bit of black. And really the difference between doing a canvas and a tiny little saw blade like this is, you know, it's just a little bit more of a dainty process. Smaller pictures too sort of create the problem of having to create depth in a much smaller space. So that's sort of one of those things that you have to try to figure out. But it makes it a fun little challenge. I'm going to take, I have some black on my palette here, and I'm just going to use a flat brush. Looks like this, just a little flat brush. And I sort of created this hill that's sort of blocking that out, and I'm just going to make little trees. I did another video and it's called the 20 plane challenge. And this would be one of those surfaces that would be really fun to sort of try, where you try to put, you know, at least 20 planes of depth into your picture. And if you're looking for a good challenge too, that's kind of fun. You basically make yourself put as many different planes of distance inside your picture as you can possibly muster. And it just sort of teaches you to focus on creating depth. One of the best ways to create depth in a picture is with horizontal lines. So basically every line that goes horizontally across your picture, it creates depth, every single one of them. And depth really does sell. People like depth and, you know, little special sort of details in their pictures. All right, I'm gonna wipe my brush off and then I'm gonna grab a little filbert. And I literally have probably 100 different filbert brushes, 100 different flat brushes. They're different brands, they're different materials. Definitely don't lock yourself into painting with one certain brand of paint, one certain brand of brush. You know, branch out and play around with stuff. I even try to paint with brushes that aren't like, you know, oil painting brushes. Like I do watercolor brushes, I do some makeup brushes. I have a barbecue grill brush, you know, for like basting meats. So just playing around with that stuff it's fun. You never know out there what's going to work until you try something. This one is just like a yellow nylon sort of brush, and as long as the bristles are stiff enough, your paint is thin enough, and the bristles aren't too long, you can really do stuff with a lot of different filberts. I'm going to give this guy a little friend. So when I did this other one, I did sort of the upward pushing. And I'm going to do this one down. Leave a big bald spot in it. If you have a hard time with palm trees, not palm trees, these are pine trees. Pine trees or palm trees, I did another show about that too that might be really helpful. I think a lot of people like that particular little episode that I did. And I think I'll probably just work on maybe putting a little bit of highlights in this tree and then I'm done. There's only so much you can do with such a small space, and so I sort of, you know, accept that and move on. And that's sort of another fun thing about these. And even though they aren't super detailed and they don't have a lot to them, they really do sell a fair amount. Let me grab a bit more white. When I prep these saw blades, I do them out in the grass. Now, if it's wintertime, like right now is wintertime, before winter came, I prepped a ton of saw blades so that I could do work with them over the winter. But I also have like an outdoor, like a machine shed. And so when it was warm on one day, I was able to go out there and do some prep on some saw blades. I did a crosscut saw for somebody specifically, and I had to get it primed. So, definitely do not spray paint in your house. If you have to prep a saw blade, do it outside. Do it on cardboard or newspaper or in the grass. Just do it somewhere, obviously, where it's well ventilated. And I think we're done, guys. Nothing special. I wanted to do something really simple, and that is painting a saw blade. It is really no different than painting on canvas, except you prime it differently. Saw blades, if you live in any area where people do any sort of woodwork at all, ask some of your friends who do woodwork, if you have some, if they have old saw blades, because people always have old saw blades laying around. I have people all the time that are like, hey, I have this pile of saw blades, do you want them? And so I usually get them for from my friends, the smaller ones anyway. I usually get them for free because people are always looking to get rid of them. So that's sort of something to look into. Anyways, guys, I'm Gabby. Thank you very much for watching. If you guys have any questions, comments, whatever, put them in the comment section of the video and I will address them. And until next time, I really do hope that you fall in love with oil painting just as much as I have. Bye, guys.